let's go back to the book now. Again, it's a very, very touching. I'm going back and forth because I don't want, like I said, I didn't want to get overwhelmed by the emotions of the event. It was terrible. But let's get back into it. As troops took control of the town, groups of soldiers went from house to house, looting, raping, rounding up boys and men accused of being Biafran sympathizers and demanding money from those who were spared. Males who had been singled out were either shot on the spot or taken to the police station on NABC Road, the High Court on the Opanam Road, the soccer field, or the riverbank where they were executed. Witnesses remember seeing the streets littered with corpses. Many families fled, while others hid in the ceilings of their houses. Patrick Okonkwo recalled that his compound was overcrowded with extended family members who had fled to their home community to escape the violence elsewhere. Soldiers entered and shot his two brothers, a cousin, and two other relatives. His father buried them in shallow graves in the compound. Fabian Owezim, who was 12 years old at the time, describes being at the home of Ogbeshi, as Chief Leo Okogu, secretary of the Senior Age Grade Council, when troops arrived. Another leading citizen, Chief Michael Ugo, had arrived at the home seeking refuge with his wife, and the troops proceeded to harass and humiliate the family. "You have money, Okugu. Bring me money." Mrs. Ugo went somewhere where she had kept some money and brought a can of Ovaltine beverage, and she had stuffed money in and gave it to the guy. The guy stuffed them in his bag. One of the soldiers with him, he had two, was literally crying. He said, "Boss, it's okay. Let's go. He curled his whip on the face of the guy and told him to shut up. At this point, he told Mr. Ugo to roll on the ground. The man rolled on the ground. When he stood up, he must have been dizzy. He fell. Emmanuel Chukura, who had already moved his family to Onitsha, fled to join his family, but Patience Chukura, the wife of his brother Edwin, 27 years old and pregnant with their fourth child, describes what happened on October 6. "Somebody came looking for my brother-in-law and said that the federal troops have come into Asaba and they were burning houses. You open the door and tell them that no Biafran troop was there. Then the house will be burnt. Everything will be burnt. People who went into the streets were stopped and soldiers gathered men together. My husband and brother and all those about 400 people who were following them, they were shot in front of the police station at Asaba. That made me hysterical. I held on to the person I saw, the soldier. I said, 'Why did you kill my husband?' The man with the butt of the gun hit me on the chest and said, 'Woman, if you're not careful, you'll get killed as well.' Papa, that's my father-in-law. When he heard that his two sons were killed, he went out. They shot him. They killed him. We were in fear that they were going to wipe out everybody in Asaba, especially male children." When Emmanuel eventually returned to Asaba, he learned that he had lost both parents and four brothers, Eddie, Christian, Dennis, and Samson. Many other survivors also gave vivid accounts of acts of brutality carried out against individuals and groups in the days immediately after the troops' arrival. On the main road, I just heard one young boy, a secondary school student. He was begging. He was saying things like, "Please, come and tell them I'm not a soldier. Come and tell them I'm not a soldier." Then I heard this shot, pop, and the boy screamed and said in our language, "They've shot me. They've shot me." And they were kicking him, lying on the ground with a gunshot wound. The next thing I heard was something like indescribable noise, and I looked again and the lorry had gone over him. In an attempt to bring violence to an end, the Asagba Council, a group comprising members of the most senior age grades, approximately 50 to 70 years old, along with the town's chiefs, met in order to discuss the best ways to impress on the troops that Asaba had played no role in the Biafran incursion and that the community welcomed the return of federal forces. The leaders decided that each of the town's 5 quarters would raise a levy of £50 for the troops, while the Omo of Asaba, the most important women's leader, would present a traditional woven cloth to their commander. Testimony of John. This is from John Kanayo Udsin Odita, Ohaneze Petition 1969. An initial donation of £50 to pay for drinks was delivered immediately to a federal officer, who expressed regret for the number of civilians killed by what he called stray bullets. Early on the morning of October 6, 4 men from another quarter were dispatched to deliver their contribution, and when they failed to return, a second group of 4 was sent to find out what had happened. They also vanished. In the evening of October 6, in the hope of bringing violence to an end, leaders ordered town criers with gongs to summon everyone to assemble the next day to welcome federal troops and offer a pledge of loyalty to one Nigeria. People were encouraged to wear akwacha, the ceremonial white woven clothing that signifies peace. It is unclear exactly who had come up with the idea of the assembly. Fabian Oweazim recalls that he was ordered to bring a typewriter to a man named Mr. Ogu, who typed the welcome address to the troops and had it sent to a leader in another quarter. Another witness recalled that criers informed him that announcement was made at the order of the Vandals. Whatever the origin, many believe this will be the last painful sacrifice that we would be called upon to make. Although there was much trepidation and some refused to participate, hundreds of men, women and children, including some who had originally fled to the bush, assembled for a parade. With community elders in front, up to 4,000 people participated. Many gathered by a large tree on Nebisi Road, where they were joined by groups coming out from houses throughout the 5 quarters of Asaba. With many singing, dancing and chanting One Nigeria, they advanced past St. Joseph's Church and continued east. Any expectation that these gestures of goodwill would appease the troops was quickly dashed. Marchers were flanked by federal soldiers to prevent them from fleeing, and witnesses report that the soldiers also selected males at random and executed them in full view of participants. Survivors recalled seeing dozens of bodies, including that of one of the town criers, along with the mangled bodies of the 4 who had been sent earlier to deliver money. Once the crowd reached the corner of Ogbogonogo and Ogbeke markets, troops separated out women and small children who were corralled into the maternity hospital at Nebisi Road, while the men were channeled between 2 rows of soldiers between the side roads that led to the square at Ogbiosowa. According to Peter Okonjo, women who came with their sons were removing their skirts and gloves to disguise, so that their male children, they are no longer men, but women. So when I saw this scenario going on, I felt something is wrong. If these women can disguise their children, and my mother is not here, what do I do? And I looked at the whole place. There's nowhere for escape. Once the women had gone, machine guns both mounted on trucks and freestanding were revealed, and mass shooting began. Ifi Urey, then 13 years old, had joined the parade with his father and 3 older brothers, Paul, Emmanuel, and Medua. Some people broke loose and tried to run away. My brother was holding me by the hand. He released me and pushed me further into the crowd. They shot my brother in the back. He fell down, and I saw blood coming out of his body. And then the rest of us just fell down on top of each other, and they continued shooting and shooting and shooting. I lost count of time. I don't know how long it took. After some time, there was silence. I stood up. My body was covered in blood, but I knew that I was safe. My father was lying not far away. His eyes were open, but he was dead. Exactly how many died is not clear. Between 500 and 800 seems likely. In addition to many who had died in the previous days. Oh boy. Exactly how many died is not clear. Between 500 and 800 seems likely, in addition to many who had died in the previous days. Sporadic shooting went on for several hours, until it was growing dark and the soldiers began to disperse. Survivors lay still under the heap of bodies for a long time before feeling it was safe to wriggle out and run into the nearby bush. Ifi Urey lost his father and his brothers, Emma and Paul. Medua was shot repeatedly but recovered. Community elders had been at the front of the parade, and large numbers of the leading age grades, including Michael Ugo and Leo Kogu, were among those who died. With all the surviving men in hiding, it was left to women and children to attempt to find the bodies of their fathers, brothers, husbands, and other relatives, and then drag them home for burial. Joseph Nwanje had escaped into the bush from the family compound earlier, When he returned a few days later, he learned of the death of his uncle, George Nwaje, killed in the family compound by occupying soldiers, as well as of his two brothers, ages 12 and 17, who died in October 7 mass shooting. Mom told me that in the evening hours of the 7th, she had to go look for their corpses at the mass place where they were shot. Mom in the evening was able to identify their corpses, took them in a wheelbarrow, pushed them to the family house where they were buried. So I never saw their corpses, I never saw their bodies. Most victims, however, were dumped in mass graves or thrown into the Niger. When it was safe to move about, Frank EJ, a local Red Cross worker, enlisted surviving men to dig hurried, shallow graves wherever they found bodies around the town, without observing crucial ceremonial practices. There are so many, I cannot remember. So many. In spite of these efforts, many lay unburied for several days. One eyewitness interviewed in 1977 reported that for nearly 2 days, the soldiers wouldn't let us come near without opening fire. It was only when the stench of decaying corpses was all over the place that the soldiers relented. She retrieved her husband's body, but not that of a Catholic lay brother, Ignatius Barma, who had died beside him. She was able to put tinielia, a white cloth, over him, an important ceremonial act usually done by close relatives. Graves were dug once people began to trickle back into town, such as 13-year-old Patrick Obelwe, who recalls, "Some were already decomposing, where you can poke somebody and their head will roll off, and we just put them into one grave. There was no coughing, nothing. We were the youths of the village, just dug shallow graves and then put them there. Everywhere was stinking. We knew it was our duty at the time to bury the dead." Emeka Okonkwo was a small child in 1967, but he recalls that his father also helped bury the dead. He left the house with a shovel, and he took this scented leaf and put it in his nostrils. That would enable them to stand the stench. Following the events of October 7, the worst killing stopped. However, federal soldiers remained in Asaba, waiting to cross the Niger into Onitsha. Some were billeted in the houses of families whose men folk they had executed, and individual acts of violence, and particularly rape, continued. Gertrude Ogunkeye recounted how soldiers abducted a young woman for a week before they brought her back to her father. When she came back, she was a different girl. She wouldn't talk to anybody. She was very weepy. You see, we come from a culture where talk like rape is taboo. You know, a girl says she's been raped, getting married is like an impossibility. Just as mothers had tried to shield their sons from execution by dressing them as young girls, now families try to protect their daughters by disguising them as older women. Victoria Nwanze, who was in her early teens in 1967, recalled, "I carried my younger brother at the back, and my grandmother gave me a dress so that I would look like an old woman. The same thing with my sister and my cousin." Martina Saji also reported that the family protected her older sister, then age 18, by disguising her as an older woman. By the second week of October, most Asabans had found refuge in nearby bush or in small towns in the area. Others had gone to Biafra and did not return until the war ended in 1970. The once thriving town now had a ghostly appearance with empty streets, most houses burned, and everything of value stolen. I'm going to round up by going back to There Was a Country by Chinua Achebe. And the reason I want to do this is because at the Oputa panel, Colonel Aruna was there, and he was asked if he was sorry, for what happened. I'm going to read his response to you. By the way, we all know that Murtala Mohammed was the commanding officer of Division 2, and he had his lieutenants, and one of them was Colonel Ibrahim Aruna. So you could call him the operational leader of what that happened with the execution and all that. I want to read something to you. Give me a second. Let me find that page. Yeah, I think I found it. Let me read what Colonel Aruna said first. He became Major General, by the way, much later. By the time he was Colonel. Testifying at the Justice Oputa panel, a Nigerian version of South Africa's Truth and Reconciliation Commission, Major General Ibrahim Aruna, belligerent and unremorseful as ever, proclaimed, as the commanding officer and leader of the troops that massacred 500 men in Asaba, I have no apology for those massacred in Asaba, Owerri, and Ameke Item. I acted as a soldier, maintaining the peace and unity of Nigeria. If General Yakubu Gowon apologized, he did it in his own capacity. As for me, I have no apology. Did Gowon apologize? Let me read you what Gowon said. And Gowon said this about 35 years after the fact. Gowon says, General Gowon broke his silence 35 years later on this matter. I'll take that slowly. General Gowon broke his silence 35 years later on this matter and apologized for this atrocity to the Igbos in Asaba. It came to me as a shock when I came to know about the unfortunate happenings that happened to the sons and daughters of Asaba. I felt very touched, and honestly, I referred to the killings and asked for forgiveness, being the one who was in charge at that time. Certainly, it is not something that I would have approved of in whatsoever. I was made ignorant of it. I think until it appeared in the papers. A young man wrote a book at that time. So, yes, you could say Aruna was a leader. This is how Achebe described him, called him the leader of the massacre infamy. But he felt no remorse. Well, here's the point. Why would he feel no remorse? Was it because he was a bad person? Maybe. But that's a very simplistic take. We have to understand the events surrounding this particular period. That before they arrived, the Nigerian forces, a lot of Northerners were killed by Biafran forces. And as far as they were concerned, if the Igbos, listen to me, please, if the Igbos could kill Northerners, mostly Hausas, because we're the ones who traveled a lot, if the Igbos could kill Hausas, then they also had the right to kill the Igbos. They didn't care whether those Igbos were from the Midwest or from the East. Does that make it right? No. But sometimes you read and then you see, he's like Achebe puts it, belligerent. That's where I can find the way he said it. It says here that Major General Ibrahim Aruna, belligerent and unremorseful as ever. You can say that, but why wouldn't he want to apologize for the death of people? Because his own men were killed. Could it be that he also saw that his own people of his own ethnic stock were killed by the Biafran soldiers? In other words, here is the thing. There will be no October 7 if there was no August 27. The push by the Biafrans into the Midwest, the massacre of the Northerners in the Midwest, the creation of detention camps, the killings of Benis and Yorubas a lot of Yorubas were killed, by the way, by the Igbos in the Midwest, Bini people in the Midwest. That thing got to the Nigerian forces. So by the time they came, was told they were retaliating for that occupation, not necessarily for what happened before them, because that one they don't settle scores already. That was in 66. The coup happened January 66, counter coup July 66. The massacres in the north, September. Actually, the massacres in the east was August, September. Then the one in the north was September. A lot of people don't know that what happened in the north in September 66 was actually response to what happened in the east in August of 66, where a lot of Northerners were killed. And that number goes into thousands. I've had a session on it here before. So the real issue is, when Nigerians came, when the Nigerian forces just go, they were like, you know what, we're going to deal with all these people. Here is the problem. The Midwest is not an exclusive Igbo area. Were there Igbos there? Yes. But there were other people there as well. And some of them suffered for this. These are sometimes the consequences of, like, what's the word now? I'm trying not to say some things because I don't want to also lessen the weight of the Asaba massacre. And that's why when somebody asked me yesterday, I was surprised the way people were responding. I was concerned, actually. It was the image of the Asagba talking about the fact that they haven't had a sitting Nigerian president apologize for the massacre. And people in comment sections like, why are they talking about it now? How come they didn't say when Jonathan was president, when Buhari was president? It doesn't matter when. If you ask me, they deserve it. They deserve the apology. They deserve that thing, because for them, that'll give them closure. A lot of people, imagine 500 to 800 men and boys above the age of 10 killed, just like that. Mothers lost sons, fathers lost the generation, some fathers even died themselves, mothers also lost husbands. And I think this and the Onitsha massacre as well, but specifically the Asaba massacre, is something that, we should be very careful. Whilst although we speak a lot against Biafra propaganda, Asaba massacre is not about propaganda. It's what happened. However, Biafrans, starting with Chinua Achebe in his book in this conversation, have used that to score points by saying after they're also Igbo. But let me make something very clear. Nigerians do not owe Igbo apology for anything. Nigerians owe Igbo compassion, understanding, empathy, but no apologies. Because what's happening is people using a particular incident to blackmail the entire country to say, yeah, come up, yeah, nobody. But if you're talking about the Asaba, in my opinion, I think it's important that we actually acknowledge the fact that terrible things happened. And that's probably one of the worst things to happen in Nigeria, because nobody said the people even, yeah, they did something. To be fair, this whole thing was triggered by the person who tried to kill a Nigerian officer. While the Igbos were running away, where they were retreating, that cocked his gun and shot at the Nigerian officer in his chest. He didn't die. That's according to John the St. Joe, and then that led to the killing of those people. But like I said, we can all talk about the reasons, and I decided to talk about the reasons and the context, but that doesn't in any way justify the killings. Someone says the Anioma people have said they are not Igbos. So let me say something about Anioma. Anioma has always been a mixed space. That's the mistake the Igbos of the Southeast are making. In other words, there are people in that space who have Igbo origins, but there are people there who also don't have Igbo origins. There's something like Anioma. Anioma is an acronym, right? It's not like an ethnic identity. There are different groups that make up that group, whether it's the Aniocha or Ndokwa or Shimili, or what's the other one? Aniocha, Ndokwa, Ika, or Anoshimili. Each of those groups, some of them have Yoruba amongst them, some of them have Igal among them, some of them have Bini amongst them, and then they have Igbo. Those are the four groups that make up most of those animal communities. Igala, Bini, Yoruba, and Igbo. It takes a lot of people who are not cultured to keep shouting they are Igbo, especially when they are saying they are not. By the way, the Biafrans, like I said earlier, used that incident to further talk about genocide. See what happened in Asaba. So let me say what Biafrans did, and I think this is what anybody would do if they have no other thing to do. Everything they found around them, they used to their advantage, even events that had nothing to do with them or the ones that they caused themselves. And I'll say this: Biafra caused Asaba massacre, but they are not the ones responsible for it. The Nigerian army is responsible for that massacre. But the Biafrans, will now use that as an advantage and say, oh, see genocide against Igbo people. The rhetoric of genocide thus became one of Biafra's most effective tools to stiffen the resolve of the Igbo in the East and to obtain international support. Throughout the war, Gowon and his government strongly denied such a characterization, maintaining that the only goal was to restore federal authority over the entire country, and assuring the Igbo they would not be harmed if they would give up the fight. Nevertheless, this official position was undermined by reports from the field, and when news of the killings in Asaba reached the east, it awakened in Igbos across the Niger the worst fear about genocide. That's from Asiodu. Indeed, in February 1968, in a memo to the United Nations Secretary General Youthant, Biafra cited the massacres as one example of proving that this was a war of genocide. So Biafran caused the wala in the Midwest. Nigeria now did the terrible thing. The Nigerian army massacred the folks in Asaba. Biafran now used what happened to justify the need for secession when they sent report to the United Nations by calling it genocide. But if you don't go back a bit to understand how everything happened, you can run around with what Biafra said. Is genocide? Or was it genocide? It was. But it wasn't something targeted at Biafra. It was something Biafra itself caused. But again, it's a war, so people use anything to their advantage. I mean, witnesses in Asaba also mentioned Isiago as well as killing in other nearby communities such as Oguashiku, Ibusa, and Igbodo, all of which are largely ignored in media and official reporting. Most of these killings can be attributed to general indiscipline and intensified by ethnic hostility. However, the October 7 massacre in Asaba's Ogbiosowa Square displayed planning and coordination from the moment that hundreds of people assembled and began to march, dance, and sing, to the removal of women and children, to the final systematic killing of men and boys. In the oral account of what happened, a consistent theme is outrage at a despicable betrayal. The people of Asaba had assembled to declare allegiance to Nigeria in a traditional display of dance and music, only to be slaughtered, and thus this news sent a uniquely chilling message to other Igbos in Biafra, effectively helping prolong the war. Four decades after the war ended, Asaba still displays many scars. These are visible in the derelict buildings that remain unrestored and on the bodies of those who survived. There are also invisible scars, fresh in the minds and lives of Asabans, who have kept alive the memory of the cruel death of their fathers, brothers, and uncles, even as their trauma has remained unrecognized by institutionalized public memory. As one informant recounted, nobody seemed to know about it. Even in the military history books, there is no mention of it. It has got to be part of our history, because if you don't have a history, you cannot go ahead in life. That's from Gertrude Ogunkeye. In 2002, after the veil of secrecy had been lifted at the Oputa panel, former President Gowon, while stating that he had no knowledge of the atrocity at the time, offered a formal apology to the people of Asaba, a deeply symbolic moment that has paved the way for more Asabans to speak out, with some survivors working now to create a public memorialization. Finally, the story of Asaba speaks to larger issues of trauma and potential reconciliation that extend beyond Asaba, Nigeria. As Francisco Fernandez wrote, describing the exhumation of the victims of General Franco's troops during the Spanish Civil War, the recovery of historical memories speaks of the resilience of traumatic memory through years of silence and fear. In Nigeria, the unresolved burden of memory has become a potent symbol of festering injustice that has stood in the way of meaningful reconciliation by keeping alive ethnic tensions. The Asaba massacres were ultimately a product of the same ethnic hostility that simmers today. Yet, they were not inevitable. They resulted from the decisions of individuals, and they provide us with opportunities for moral reflection. Strikingly, the people we have interviewed have repeatedly spoken to the pressing need to use their experience for good. As Francis Wanje told us, for Nigeria to be great, people have to be educated to understand that you cannot resolve differences by conflict. It's good that we have lessons from there. I want to end by saying this. One of the things I've noticed, right, in studying folks from River State and Akwa Ibom State, that side, and also the Midwest, there's something they do that I don't think people actually acknowledge. I don't think we even notice, let alone acknowledge. They are healed. They are healed. Sunset in Biafra was written in 1973. When you read that book, Igbos hate the book. They always cursing the man out. But if you are an objective person and you read that book, you even see how he was making excuses for even Ojukwu. 3 years after the war. In other words, it was still fresh. But even at that, he was still able to give grace. You read Oswanlele's work. He's been in. You can still see that grace. I don't know what they did, but I think it's the best way to actually move forward as a people. Not that the pain doesn't matter. The pain matters, and that's why I support their call for apologies, because it gives them closure. But they're not doing it from a place of either blackmailing Nigerians or Nigeria or showing pushing a victim narrative. They're not victims of the story. They were killed. They are the victims of the event, but they're not the victims of the story. And that shows that they are healed. And that's something to learn from. Even in our lives, things will happen to you sometimes, or things have happened to us, and some of us have not healed from them. We've got to find a way to actually, move on. Not that it's so easy, but they did it. Akwa Ibom, Cross River, Rivers, Bayelsa, Delta, Edo. Those 6 states in particular, the way they approach the issue of the war, if they taught their children the way Igbos teach their children, we will not be able to live in this country together. They didn't. How do I know? Look at the way they talk now. The pain is there. It's not like, in the sense that they know it happened, but they don't behave based on it. I've lived among them. And I think it's something to learn from. It's something to learn from. But federal government, if you are hearing this, please, next year, it doesn't have to be next year, sir. It could be before the 59th anniversary. Please, what Gowon did helped a lot of people during the Puta panel. There's nothing wrong if a president says it and says, listen, we apologize for the massacre. It doesn't take anything away from Nigeria. But Nigeria would never apologize to Biafra. Never.